started, before I start the presentation, some of you might know the person you're sitting next to, but, or in front of or behind. If not, why don't you just turn? I think we're coming from all over Iowa and all over other states too, so maybe turn and introduce yourself to someone before we get started. Just make a new contact if you don't know the people sitting around you. Next, you can keep talking with that same person. I want you to look up at my Wordle. I did just kind of a brainstorm of different things I wanted to talk about today, or what brought me to make this presentation. So still talking with that person, look up here, see are there maybe words that really mean a lot to you, or phrases, or acronyms, things you really want to hear me talk about today, or things you have questions about. You can talk to that same person. So just kind of looking through those things. What are you really interested in finding out about? Are there things up there that don't mean anything to you right now? Okay, what are some of the things that came up that people for sure want to hear me talk about, or things that we can maybe, because I'm not an expert on all this either, but things that we could talk about as a group? Were there some that were really, I know I heard proficiency was one, the proficiency-based. And in my sense, I would say I'm terming this like proficiency-based assessing in my classroom is what that focus is. Anything else that really stuck out there that you want to make sure we talk about?
I'm always interested in the actual component of all this because my brain has a kind of hardship merging the two, like the actual IPA model with what they really push with TPRS. So that always intrigues me personally.
And that's a good point. And we'll get into it later, what we've done at our school is we're using the actual proficiency guidelines. But I would say what we're really doing is doing performance-based assessments. And there's a little bit of distinction there that we'll get into. But we found the proficiency guidelines were easy for us to interpret the key phrase or that was bumping someone up to the next level. So I say we're using proficiency guidelines, but what we're doing in class is more performance-based, because proficiency assessment is like when you're doing the OPI interview, and it's you go till they fall, right? We're not doing anything that long. We're giving them a unit or context or certain vocabulary or targets that we're working on, and then we're basing their performance on that, and then we move on. But the actual proficiency targets were easier for us to interpret. There are performance descriptors from Actual 2, but we felt they were just a little bit too general than what we needed. But that's something else to look at. I think I probably just need to, no?
Just went to sleep, I think. You said to wake it up unless your computer died.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay, anything up there that you had, that you didn't know what it meant?
Can you go to the acronyms?
Sure, for actual PLC, professional learning community, some personal learning community too, it depends on how it is. IC, for us it's instructional coaches. How many people in here have a school that's been awarded the teacher leadership compensation? Okay, so this is the stimulant, a lot of what I'm working on came from our school, starting to work on that this past year. So for us, the ICs are instructional coaches, CFAs, common formative assessments, which we need to do. TPRS was up there, of course. I heard some that's what's due for.
There's
Do
people that founded PLCs, like Rebecca.
Yeah.
So they wrote, it's Robert.
And Rebecca?
the two, so we have to work with, that's kind of a schematic we're working with at our school too. Okay, so what I really wanted to do in this is give you an idea of what we're doing at my school, at North Scott High School. But what my main impetus was I wanted to take all the stuff that we're supposed to be doing, but I needed to make it meaningful, so that I wasn't doing, I have to do data collection. Do you guys, how many people have to do required data collection? And so if you're not, you're lucky. But maybe you want to, but we have to, but I needed to make that meaningful for me in the context of TPRS classroom. I couldn't do something, I didn't want to assess something that for me had no meaning to what I wanted my students to be able to do. So this is just my information. I work at North Scott High School. It's my second year there. I've worked in Texas, I've worked in the Minneapolis area, and then I taught for a long time online. And it's in Elbridge, Iowa, which is just north of Davenport, if you're unfamiliar with Eastern Iowa. I'm not from there originally, we've only been there for 2 years. It's a really great school. I started blogging. I don't have a lot up there, but I will hopefully be adding to it as I go along. And that's by Twitter. However, I'm more of a lurker than I am of a tweeter, so just so you know that, I do occasionally, or lots of times I retweet other people's things that I find are great, but I really kind of lurk more than anything right now on Twitter. So stop me as we go through this with any questions or comments, so I make sure I'm being clear with what I'm saying. And then I thought 2 other big things. We've already said we want to spend some time on this. We can come back to this on the end and share what people are doing already and ask ideas, get opinions. And then the other thing was how our gradebooks are set up. Is that something that people are wanting to talk about and share today too? So I thought after I go through what we're doing at North Scott High School, we should have some time at the end, and we can talk about those as a big group and share some ideas. I'm pulling a lot from Martina Beck's. She does a lot with proficiency-based assessment, and she always says that she's pulled a lot from Scott Benedict, and he has a lot of stuff. How many of you are on the Facebook group that if you were with Grant, just mentioning the IFLT? And so yesterday, I think it was posted yesterday, I found one that had a great question. Someone was new to this and saying, what's your gradebook setup like? I'll go back and try and find a link and stick it in one of my slides too, but there's a great resource of different ideas. Grant was in on there, Scott Benedict was in on there, a lot of people chiming in on what different gradebooks can look like. So that's some place to go look if you're running for some gradebook ideas. So year 1 at North Scott High School, this was kind of me here inside the computer. It was a little stressful. I may have alluded in my interview that I wanted to do TPRS, but I maybe didn't come right out and say I wanted to do TPRS, but I kind of alluded to that's what I wanted to do because I had no idea really where they were at. So I was one of 3.5 teachers, and I was the only one doing TPRS or wanting to do TPRS because I taught online. I taught online for like 8 years, and I knew that when I wanted to come back, this is the one I wanted to try. So I really wanted to do it. And the other half teacher was also into it, but it was a little bit of a struggle in our department because not everyone was on board. How many of you are in a department where not everyone is doing TPRS? It can be difficult depending on what your department is like or depending on what your administration wants. So we'll talk about a little bit of that. So we had curriculum meetings. I had Spanish 4 all to myself. That was awesome. I was able to order a couple of TPRS novels. Spanish 4 was going great. The kids loved it. The administration heard about that the kids loved it, so I was doing really well with Spanish 4. Spanish 1, the kids really liked what I was doing in class, but when I had curriculum meetings with the other 2 teachers, it was a struggle because my ideas were differing quite a bit from what they wanted to do. We weren't using a textbook only because we didn't physically have a textbook anymore, but it was still all the units from a textbook. So my first semester I was really trying to integrate what I wanted to do in storytelling, but make sure I covered this huge long vocab list. So it was hard. I was trying to, it was just a struggle first semester. Second semester, I was able to do a little bit of my own thing because then I didn't have to worry about kids switching from one class to another. But we had to do data teams that year too. This is before we got our teacher leadership compensation plan, but we were doing data teams already. And in Spanish 1, what they had traditionally done was pre and post testing just discrete grammar points. So the first one was, let's do the verb ser, give them a pre-test when they don't know what the verb ser is at all, so everyone's gonna fail it, And then we're gonna teach the verb ser, and then we're gonna post-test the verbs there. And then they had it on a spreadsheet, and then it would, kick up the kids that were proficient, and we had to do, I think they called it verb therapy with the kids that did it. And I was like,
Or the kids who were too lazy to do it.
it was just, I was like, really, because I didn't really want to teach the verb stare as the verb stare, I was doing it in my stories, and I was adding different things, and we would eventually get to it, but I certainly didn't want to, at the beginning of my class, start with the verb stare and just do it that way. Luckily, we only had to do data team collection on one class. So as I mentioned, I was the only one doing Spanish 4, so I did Spanish 4, and I decided I'm just gonna see how my kids do on fluency and free writes. Now, these are kids that have not been in any sort of TI or CI TPRS classroom before, but I was still using their fluency writes just to hopefully see a gain as we went along. I had to they set up a spreadsheet for me, a tech team, and I just wanted to see if they were getting, I guess, like a 10% growth between free writes. So it would just, my spreadsheet would just tabulate, and the template's on here. My spreadsheet would, except I don't see my screen here. Let's see.
It's up above you. Your dual screen.
Oh, there we go. Get a preview of all my, there we go. So I have to scroll.
You don't have to scroll without being able to see it on your screen. You'll just watch the top screen.
Oh, okay, watch the screen and, got it. Oh, great, thank you. So this is my template, and, what it does is you put, how do I get, this look too big? Check control minus, so that's shrink it down a little bit.
Should.
It's not a big deal, but anyway, so if you would click on my template, what you'll see is you could punch in, and there's one sheet that has it filled out with kids' names, not, they're just their first names. So I could type in a free write point, just the number of words they got. It would go to free write 2, and here it would show their growth, and it would just keep going and going. At the bottom of the spreadsheet, it just tabulates the whole class, so I could just see some growth. Now, they hadn't been exposed to this before. Some of them, it went up and down. I was just doing it because I needed to collect data, but it was a good thing for me to see just how my students were doing overall. Sometimes I felt like one topic came more easily to them, so, it kind of went up and down. So I didn't base a lot on this, more than just, I had to do data collection, and it was interesting for me. If the kids wanted to look at it, they could too, but it wasn't a high stress thing. It wasn't grade dependent at all on this.
So that was based on the number of words in their free writes?
This was just number of words, and I just wanted to see what kind of growth they had between. And again, it was just what I had to do, and it was interesting, and it was mainly for me. The kids kind of know what they're getting on each one. Then in year 1, I started thinking about what I wanted my grade book to look like. This is from Ken O'Connor, and this is something we're doing at our school too. We went through this repair kit for grading, 15 fixes for grades. It's really a good thing to go through. But number 7 is you don't want to organize information on your grade book by assessment methods or simply summarize into a single grade, which I think was very traditional. I mean, how many of us have had in the past, or maybe still do, you have quiz grades, you have test grades, so it's more organized about what kind of thing it is instead of being on a standard or a learning target or something like that. So my first year, I did, and I think I was the only one doing this, but it kind of was melding into what they had as our department. But I based it by reading, listening, writing, speaking, and then I had this daily kind of whatever I wanted in there, maybe like homework and practice and things like that. The positive I thought of that, it was skills-based. But what I really wanted to do here was get a good idea of where they were at with their language skills. And I didn't do that very well the first year, because inside of speaking, if we just did a practice, I would count it in speaking. It wasn't just things I was assessing. So my first year, that's what I did, but I needed to tweak it for my second year. And then towards the end of my first year, I came across these speaking assessments, and this is from Martina Bex. She's on Teachers Pay Teachers, the Comprehensive Classroom, and this is a free download, so I included the link down here. And I came across this speaking assessment that she had that I thought, oh, this will work for Spanish 4, and she has all different levels here, so this would be her first one. So she is marking students beginning, emerging, developing, proficient, and advanced, and then she's using the actual, kind of a limited or a summarized actual statement for each of those. So I started looking at those, and it kind of got me thinking of how I can make this work kind of in a broader picture in my classroom. So you can see those are just the first two, but she has it moving up where here's her proficient is now this high, and then you kick your advanced students into intermediate low, and she just keeps going. So those are kind of a good, that's kind of a starting point that I had during my first year. Then in the spring, we were awarded our teacher leadership and compensation plan, like I said, and I applied to be a content leader. So those of you that are on it, it might be called different things. So a content leader meant not necessarily I was a department chair, but I would help run our meetings, and that I was supposed to have my classroom open to my instructional coach so she could come in and work with me in my classroom, not evaluating me at all, but just helping me on whatever I wanted, which was really great. I have a great instructional coach. And because I'm just kind of starting, this is my second year using TPRS, I could really focus on different skills I wanted her to watch, and it was like having another pair of eyes in class. So that was kind of a big change. But then we also had to start using DeFore when we talked about in our curriculum meetings. And we really had to make sure we were still doing data, and now our curriculum meetings were really called PLC meetings. So we had some certain things we had to cover in those. So in year 2, I was a content leader, like I said. We were doing the PLCs for each co-taught level. These were our 4 questions we had to go to, which are really easy to cover really because we spent a lot of time on just what do we expect our students to learn, how do we know they're learning, how will we respond if they don't learn, what can we do if they already know it. So we, again, were still kind of, we had hired someone full-time, our half-time person who was also wanting to do TPRS, didn't come back because she had family and she was gonna stay home with her new baby, but we hired someone else full-time that was really on board with TPRS. So now we're kind of getting a little more even spread in our department of what we wanted to do. And one thing that really helped us was using the novels in the classroom. And I think that was really a unifying element for our whole department. We got a big grant, and we were able to use it, really helped us in Spanish 1 to start to bring some of our stuff together. And then we had these data team meetings with our IC group on our common and formative assessments that we had to establish. So one thing we all changed to in our year 2 was that we all went to this as our grade book as a department. The positive side we saw this past year, it was skills-based. Negatives for Spanish 1. Is anyone doing a grade book something like this at all? The one thing we thought was a little bit of a struggle was we have quarters, and our grading stops at each quarter, and it averages. So for us, it was maybe sometimes a struggle to get in enough of these things in a quarter that would really give a clear example, or if a student didn't do well on something, that it wouldn't really affect their grade too much within a quarter. So that was one negative. With Spanish 4, I didn't like it because I felt in the upper levels, some things I was doing were really crossing over. You know, it wasn't just a speaking, you know, so I know some people use modes, like they use interpersonal mode, presentational mode in their grade books too, and so I felt that that wasn't really working great for Spanish 4. And then again, we had this daily column that was really affecting what I wanted to see, which was, you know, give a true assessment of what their language skills were. So we did that this past year. We'll keep tweaking as we go along. And then our common formative assessments, again, we are back to, are we pre and post testing our grammar points, or are we doing proficiency or performance-based assessments? So we, with the work with our instructional coach, in our meetings, we're just, I mean, it's difficult for those of you that work in departments with people that aren't all doing the same thing. They're stressful meetings. She really worked with us to try and get us on the same page and stuff. And what we ended up with is our standards are the actual proficiency goals. So we don't necessarily use the actual world readiness standards, which are the culture comparison. Those are, we indicate what we're covering in each unit, which really those are pretty easy to hit most of those in your units that you're developing. But what we're looking at is in every skill, we're wanting to push them towards towards their level of proficiency. So those, our proficiency levels have actually become our standards at North Scott. Right now, we still do grade percentages. Has anyone moved into more a standard-based grading system, or is everyone still doing percentages?
Going into that.
Like soon, or like next year?
Starting some of my classes next year.
And how will you be, do you know how it's going to be? Is it gonna be like the letter system? Is it gonna be 4-point system?
4-point system.
A 4-point system. So right now, we're eventually gonna move here, although we are having a lot of pushback in our district of doing it at the high school level. Elementary's been doing it and everyone seems fine with it. Junior high's probably gonna move towards it, parents are okay with that. High school, we're having a lot of pushback because parents don't feel like it's gonna give a good reflection of where they're at for when they go on to college and scholarships and all that kind of stuff. So that's our big discussion in our district. So right now, we're still here with percentages, but we're supposed to be teaching 2 learning targets and teaching 2 standards, but we're still having to report it as points and percentages. So this really works for us. So you can see our levels again. This up here, if a kid's hitting up into novice high, they're getting a 9. If they're hitting up into advanced, and this changes for each of our levels. If they're proficient, 8.5, 7.5, 6.5, 5.5. But if you want to do something on this, if you're going with a point system, you know, your advanced could be getting a 4, it could be a 3, 2, 1 kind of system. Or if you're doing the letter system, this could easily convert into, I think this is exceeding, mastery, progressing, I think most people call this one, and developing too. So it could kind of, I think for us, once we've established this, we see how this could work for us into if we ever move to a more standards-based grading on the right-hand side there. So what we've done really is because we've called this as our standards, we had to go back through and decide where do we think our Spanish 1 kids are gonna get, where do we think our Spanish 2 kids are gonna get, and that's what our whole standards are based on in our classroom. So we think Spanish 1, I just have 1 and 4 because that's what I taught last year. We think Spanish 1s are probably gonna get, most of our students are gonna get to novice mid. So when you look at that here, we're wanting to have our proficiency level at where we think most students are gonna get. So we think most of our students are gonna get here. Now this is when you're in a TPRS classroom that I think our kids make really big gains right at the beginning. So I think it's really easy for them to probably get up into the novice mid type level. And then we think our advanced kids, we're gonna have some kids that are getting up into novice high up here. We have to always keep in mind, if you've seen this is performance descriptors and what that ACTFL says, what most kids can get to after 4 years. So if you have a traditional 4-year program, they're only gonna be able to get up into intermediate low or into intermediate mid. And I think that's a hard thing to keep in mind, especially when you're moving to more of a CI/TPRS based program. I know there's some frustrations with our Spanish 1 teachers where you used to do the family unit and then you kind of practice these model sentences and then they could write a paragraph. But what they're really doing is regurgitating what it's been in class, where when you're using CI/TPRS, it's a little bit more wide open, and where someone might say, well, they used to be able to do this, it just looks different, you know. So that's one thing that we always have to keep in mind, like where are your students really gonna be able to get after 4 years? They're gonna be able to only get to the intermediate range. So we think our Spanish 1 students, and now what I pulled for an example was just the speaking, but you can, what we've done is change this kind of wording into writing, reading, and listening for all of our levels. So for Spanish 1, we think most of our kids are gonna get to novice mid. For Spanish 2, they're probably gonna get, most of our students will get to novice high. And of course, you have kids performing above that and kids performing below that too. We want most of our students in Spanish 3 to probably be getting to intermediate low. Spanish 4, maybe most of them to intermediate mid. Although this year for Spanish 4, I kept this kind of a rubric my whole year. I'll probably be able to bump that up as we see kids that are coming, that we're using novels and we're starting, you know, doing more storytelling based things. We'll probably be able to up that a little bit. But I felt this was more apt to where my students were really this year.
Can I ask a quick question
Yeah.
that someone asked at Martina Betts's workshop? Have you ever had pushback from parents and kids where like your top level, that advanced category, and parents or kids will say, well, I did exactly what you asked from me, why don't I have an A? Have you ever had pushback like that?
Not yet. When I showed my grade book, I kept everything even as far as our skills. So reading and listening are equal to speaking and writing. Scott Benedict differs a lot, maybe some other people do, where he's putting more emphasis on the speaking and writing. I think I did that because, first of all, I think they're all 4 are pretty equal important skills, but I'm open to discussion on that because some of his points were really good too. So I feel like students overall, even if their production skills aren't up there, because my Spanish 1 kids, to be honest, I don't even assess their speaking and writing. I only did it at semester because my department decided we needed to. I didn't do it at all. So my first semester, all they're getting is reading and listening and then their daily work. That's all I focused on, because I don't think they're ready for me to assess speaking and they're not ready for me to assess writing. So I just didn't do it. And of course, that changes, you have to understand how that's gonna change a grading category. So instead of 20%, everything went to 33.33% and I was totally fine with that. Now, the other teachers did some stuff, I'm fine with that too, they were fine with me not doing it. But, so back to your question, I feel like because I'm equally grading all 4 skills, that their comprehension skills, even if they're struggling with like speaking and writing, usually their comprehension skills are really up there. And I see that as we add novels in all our levels, I feel that that's gonna keep going. So there hasn't been that kind of pushback yet. And I feel that's part of it, because we're basing we're equally evaluating their comprehensive skills as well as their productive skills.
That's kind of a general thing though, with going to the standard space where people have been doing and getting credit for it, and now they have to
Completion.
show
Yeah.
proficiency, and that is getting some pushback. I know that our district, like year after next, is planning to do like a dual year, but we're supposed to start showing the grades towards the proficiency scales, so that parents and students both get used to seeing it's not just points that I can garner, and I sort of think some of the language that people like to use for this is more than a little harsh, but they'll say untainted by, those other things. It's strictly how well can you demonstrate this target or that target. And as they learn that that's kind of the way it's and work themselves into it, hopefully by the time you get to that kind of grading change, you'll get less of that pushback.
I saw, when I was when we had standard space, and a lot of my typical A kids were having that, where parents were like, well, I have an A student, now you're only giving them a 3, they did what you asked. And I showed them, well, doing what you asked is a level 3, showing great mastery and or exceeding is the 4, and I put it in job terms where if you're being evaluated at work and you do the bare minimum the whole time, what is your raise gonna look like? Probably almost nothing, and you get to keep the status quo, which to me is a B to low B, and it says that on the rubric. And then for 4 for advancing and surpassing that minimum criteria is then when you get your raise at work and when you get to earn the A. A does not mean you can meet requirements, A means you have mastered whatever X is. And I've had parents stop pushing back since then, and now I'm back to points, but my rubrics still reflect that. Meets
Right.
requirements, ends up at an 83%.
Yep. That's when I go back to this too. This is kind of the language that I use on all sorts of assessments. So not if it's just a speaking assessment. Let's say I'm doing a project and I have a rubric. I still use this as advanced, proficient, developing, and emerging. Maybe in a project, their language is part of it, and then they have something else that was part of the project too, but I still use this. What I've seen on pushback, sometimes I rarely give a 10, and that's hard for some people. My 10s are just for the kids, maybe my Spanish 1 kids that have this already right in front and back in a free write, and they're using all the vocab that we use from the beginning, instructions that we use from the beginning of the year, and they're just going. They would get a 10, but otherwise it's a 9.5. So when I put this on a rubric, that's like 4, whatever, 4, 3, 2, 1, if you really mathematically look at a rubric like that, you can really be damaging a kid's grade. Because 4, 3, 2, 1 really isn't based on any sort of percentage. You know what I mean? So when I do rubrics now, I decide how much do I want this rubric to be worth? Is it 20 points? Okay, so what's 95% of 24 points? Or what's 95% of each category? So I end up with some rubrics that might be like 4 point something, where the total was 5. So what I get a little bit of pushback from is a student, this for me is an A. But a 10, or on a rubric maybe it was a 5 out of 5, is an A+. Because I think that's the other thing that's gotten into our kids' minds, that if I do what you ask, I should be getting 100%. And for me, that 100% means an A+. So like you were saying, 100%, I mean, nothing is gonna go over, and 95% is great, 95 is an A, 9.5 out of 10 is an A, whatever that is out of 5 is an A. But that's what I've been getting a little bit of pushback on. Well, why didn't I get all the points? You did A work and you got 95% of the points. But you have to go above and beyond to get the A.
I kind of agree with that. The thing that I also see the other side where parents are saying, like, just 10 points can can mean thousands of dollars in scholarships that they don't get. And when I think about that as a parent too, like with my own kids, and like, oh yeah, you know, cause like if some,
I mean, like if it would affect their grade so much between their final, like
Right.
between getting an A and an B and your D plus or A and an A minus or something like that in the class overall,
like
kind
if
of
an
thing.
A is like the super, yeah, an A or
Oh,
an A plus.
Yes, I
is-
see what you're getting, yeah.
Is, you know, above and beyond, so only really like, you know,
And
20% of your
that's-
class is gonna get
That's an
that.
excellent point, and I think we kept that in mind when we established these as for each grade level. Because really, when you read, I mean, when I say most of our students, I mean most of our students are gonna be able to at least get here. And a lot of our students are getting up here in Spanish 1. So I think too, when you look at these or what you're using for these, you wanna keep them realistic, and we want success for most of our students. If I really didn't have to grade them at all, I'd be totally fine with that. If at the end of the year, I could just give them feedback on how they're doing in the language, I'd love that, but that's not what kind of a world we're living in if you're in the typical high school situation or middle school situation. But, so you can see like what we picked for novice mid, and think of your Spanish 1 students, and again, this is for speaking, this is for productive, so I didn't even do this till semester 2. So just imagine your own students in Spanish 1, and I'm gonna read this to you, and think of how many students you think could probably get there. Because I bet you're gonna see that almost all of them could. So that's something we kept in mind. We're not making this like unobtainable, I think, too, when we went through it.
We also found that changed the wording, because on a lot of, like, their M is mastery.
Yes.
And students think, okay, this is what I have to do.
Right,
But they want that A for that mastery.
Yeah.
level. So instead of calling it mastery and exceeds, we went to like the advanced.
Okay.
And didn't say exceeds, because they didn't figure they needed to exceed.
They just-
could get the
yeah.
A if they could meet the standard.
yeah.
So.
And I think this is
we took
something-
that we took that whole word exceeds out so that people quit complaining.
Yep.
About, well, I learned everything I was supposed to do. Well, now on our rubrics, it doesn't say exceeds the standard, it says this is the advanced
Advanced.
level proficient.
Yeah.
Developing.
And I think that's why, there's no pushback here at the elementary school, because when you think, we do this is what my kids come home and work on. And I'm fine with them getting mastery, but that's because it's not tied to a B yet. I don't know if this would be tied to a B. And, I mean, I just put it
It's
away.
not tied to scholarship money for
Yeah,
your
I
kids
know,
either.
right, and so I understand, my kids aren't that up there yet, my oldest is only in 6th grade, but I understand when they get up to high school, I mean, I'm gonna want pretty clear expectations of what this is gonna mean, so I totally understand that. I kind of put this up arbitrarily, we're not here yet as far as, what we're doing, and I'm not sure if this would be the wording schools would use or how they'd set it up, but, yeah.
But that's what most of the books.
Most of the books are doing something like that, yeah, yeah. So, and that's I know there's some discussion too, is a mastery, because in your mind, I still think it's hard to break away from what I consider A work, I mean, I think that's how we grew up, and so I think in your mind, you kind of have that already set in your mind, and so is this, should the mastery be the one up here? Maybe, I don't know.
And I think too, if you look at it in the like uber competitive college entry and
Yeah.
scholarships.
Yep.
If other schools are having, somewhat of a, I don't wanna say watered down, but they don't
Yep.
have this high of a standard,
Yes,
then are you, putting those kids at a disadvantage?
Mm-hmm.
Which, is that fair?
right.
But I agree in theory, like, yeah, an A shouldn't be like, everybody shouldn't be getting an A.
Well, and for me, it isn't, I mean, I think a lot of my kids can probably get up here, a lot of them do. I meant like the 100%, like 9.5 to a 10 is more what I was talking about there. But yeah, that's definitely a consideration when you're doing this. So you're imagining your Spanish 1 kids, and this is what I think most of my Spanish 1 kids could probably do by the end of the year, speaking and writing. And again, see, I'm balancing this with reading and listening. So I think that's helping to balance the kids, because obviously reading and listening is easier than speaking and writing, and it's going to be, in my opinion, all 4 years, right? The ability to comprehend the language always comes before the ability to produce it. So I feel like, and maybe ours isn't the perfect way to do it, but I feel like we're balancing that pretty equally, so we're giving kids that still aren't writing very well, they still have the ability to still get a good grade in the class, so.
Does that kind of buoy up their overall Spanish?
Yeah, I feel like overall, I mean, my kids, even like in Spanish 4, the kids that got a B were really B students, I wasn't, there wasn't a B student because they were still struggling, because I have kids in Spanish 4, to be honest, and they kept going with it, and God bless them, you know, and I'm glad, and I want everyone, I have kids that are probably in Spanish 4 that are still really speaking and writing here, but they understand it, and they love reading the novels, and they love the class, and they're gonna keep going. I mean, this comes, when you think about second language acquisition theory, the speaking and writing for some kids comes a lot later, the grammatical competence comes a lot later, so I don't want to discourage them in my class. So I have not felt so far that this has really brought anyone's grade down overall. But that's something that you have to,
The hard part
it's
too
part of
is
this
the grading and
discussion.
the wording with standards. I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a really big difference too with all this, you know.
Mhm.
Even though it's standards based, it's coming to a grade, and that's what I had to do before. So I'm hoping the mind shift and like educating kids and
Mhm.
parents about the progression and the wording
Right.
of standards. I'm hoping.
And this I just threw up here, so this isn't saying what I would even necessarily do,
I think
you
it's-
know, but I think this is kind of like typical, like we said, of what you might be seeing, so, because we're still over here, we're still just doing points, but we're trying to assess them by standards. But if you're thinking of your Spanish 1, so use a limited number of words and phrases, but they are repetitive, use words, phrases, and occasional sentences to provide basic information. So right here, I'm only, when I do a free write or in a speaking, they're only using occasional sentences. Most of my kids can do an occasional sentence, even if we read a novel and then I have pictures from the novel and they have to retell it to me. Most of my kids can give me an occasional sentence. Some of them are still pointing and just saying words, and that's okay too, but most of them can at least give me occasional sentences. A lot of them are up here where they're using phrases in short, now, I'm talking Spanish 1 at the end of the year, because I did not even do this at first, not till the end of first semester because we had to. So I feel like we're keeping these pretty realistic, where most of my kids can attain that too. And like I said, when I showed you this one back here, I didn't push my kids up here for Spanish 4, I kept them here all year because I just didn't think they were ready. So I wasn't going to push them up here just because, when I really thought most of my kids aren't here yet, maybe I will be once we, if they've been in TPRS for 4 years, so. So anyway, this is a template then we had to do. Again, this is for people that have to do data analysis, but this template worked like a charm for us, so there's a link to it here. We have a tab for writing, speaking, reading, listening. At the top, this was just for Spanish 1. We put our descriptions that we had for each one, what was bumping them between proficient and advanced. And then here, we just kept our proficient at 80%. So we just plug these in, and if it's green, they were proficient or higher. If it's red, it kind of flags the student. You can look at the teacher scores, you can look at your class scores, you can do whatever you want with this. But this led us to our required discussions of how did this assessment go, was it a good assessment? We have this whole protocol we have to go through, so this is what we had to work through. If you don't have to do anything like this, this might not be valuable to you at all. But what we do like about it is it kind of flags students that are struggling in any of the skill areas. And we can, as a department, decide what can we do to help our students that are struggling that aren't at proficiency levels yet. But there's a template link on here for you if you want to look at this, if your department has to do anything like that. And it works really slick, and I had nothing to do with making it because we had all the input of how we wanted it to look, and then our instructional coach made it for us. So you can even see here, we took out our names, but we have 4 teachers, and it gives us, like, on the semester 1 final for writing, 83% of our kids were efficient or higher, or 80, 86, 87. So we felt we were doing pretty good at the end of semester 1 as far what we were saying was our proficiency levels there too. So again, this is just if you have to do data or if you like to do data. That might not be that important to you at this point. What did we decide then on our gradings at the end of this year? We've had one change. Practice or homework or whatever this might be in your classroom, in our classes now can be no more than 10% of your grade, which I'm actually okay with because I didn't want that affecting their grade too much or inflating their grade too much of what the practice was. So this is our discussion this year. We're not having to stop at quarter, so we're gonna have a whole semester, but we're wondering, do we wanna group it with receptive skills and productive skills? Just because I'm definitely gonna do this with Spanish 4, because I feel like so many of my things are mixed in. I just wanna have a more open grade book. Because you have to be conscious if you're doing something like this, that you don't just give them one reading in a quarter. And I mean a reading assessment, because you do reading all the time, but actually something that you count in your grade book. You just have to be careful because you don't want to, affect their grade too much with 1 or 2 grades. So that's why we're thinking of perhaps just grouping these together, so maybe we just have receptive skills and productive skills. So that's kind of what we're thinking of here. Again, we have to lower this to 10%, and then we have this kind of swing other column that maybe people are gonna use for culture, maybe they're gonna use for vocab quizzes or something specific like that.
Do you break it down any at all, like the writing and speaking with like interpersonal or?
We don't yet, but that was a discussion that we had. And so that's kind of things I thought we could discuss here now. I know some people just do modes. I know Scott Benedict, within his, like he'll have speaking, but within his speaking, he's saying he has 10% of speaking is presentational and the rest is interpersonal speaking then. So he has it broken down within the category. So he still has the skill categories, but he's pulling out the modes too. But I know that Grant, I think, when I was reading this, and he kind of alluded to that there, I think he does his all by modes. Like he was showing in his presentation the interpersonal mode and how he's grading that, but I think the rest of his grade book also might have the other 3 modes in it
He
too.
alluded to it, yeah.
So,
He grades, I got the impression that he grades by the 3 modes as well.
but the 3 modes. So that's another thing, which is similar because you're still really looking at their specific skills. And that's a discussion we had in our department too. Do we want to move to that? This year we're going to do this because it's really tied to what we've established as our CFAs. We feel that's a clearer vision for us. But I think using modes is another option of doing that too. And then what I'd like maybe with that, if I would do modes, I think I would lessen, I would not have them all equal. I would not have presentational equal to interpersonal and interpretive. Because what I find with presentational speaking or presentational writing in class, it becomes too much of looking up things and it's not like a true spontaneous example of their writing, but it is an important thing to learn how to do, an important skill for them to do. So definitely modes is something I think a lot of people are using.
You don't have like a midterm exam or final exam?
We have a final exam.
How's that reflect on the grade then?
So it's separate, so it would average, our finals now, also mandated by the school, can be no more than 10% of their grade.
Right, that's what mine was last year.
Yeah, so this for us would be actually 90% when,
Okay, so
if
that's
that makes
90,
sense.
and
Yeah,
that's
so this would be our 90, and then their final would be 10%. So
Are you just a semester or are you a full year for
We
each
go-
level?
we have a block schedule, but we see them the whole year, but we have an AB block, so we see them every other day for 85 minutes. But we do see them the whole year. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm 90-minute every day, one semester,
Okay.
a year.
Okay,
So it could be anywhere from 6 months to a year before I see them again
See 'em
at the
again.
next level.
mhm,
There's a lot of slag time
sure
in
there
there.
is, yeah, definitely, definitely. And then just, this was, I think, because our CFAs are proficiency-based, it becomes a circle for us. Now we have conversations about our teaching practices, and that leads us into how are we assessing and what kinds of things are we want assessing. Even our finals have changed. Our finals we do major things in each of the skill. We don't have a discrete grammar point or discrete grammar section on
Our final
it.
exam is also a pre-test beginning of the semester,
Oh, okay,
and we had to show growth.
right,
That was tied to, they call it 301 month. Most teachers just told the kids to fail the pre-test because they need to show growth. I
Right.
didn't ever do that, but a lot of teachers just said, just fail it and move on.
another, because it's not gonna affect your grade.
But
That's kind of what I felt
the
about the SARE test.
the final one does affect their grade, 10% of their grade,
Okay,
but it also affects the teacher, how much money they get.
Oh
oh,
my God.
where do you teach? You're in
It
Iowa?
was Arizona,
Oh, it's in Arizona, oh,
Jeez.
okay,
it's called 301 money legislative number, I guess,
yeah.
and so, yeah. we did
That's
that.
tough, I think, when you start looking
Yeah,
at
it-
assessments tied into.
It's terrible, it's horrible.
Yeah, because obviously they're gonna show growth
Yeah.
if they're pretest.
But I just went back to Iowa, so I'm teaching Iowa, so.
Do you
Awesome.
allow for reassessments as well?
That's one thing
Is
that-
that an assumption that I'm making or not?
Yes, they definitely, if they, I rarely have students ask about it in Spanish 4. In Spanish 1, I'll have some students come in and say,
Sure,
I didn't do good on this listening thing, can I do it? So I'll give them an alternate thing, or they'll do the same
Is
one
it
again.
not standard practice, they have to request it, or?
Yeah.
They have to request
They
it,
just have to
or-
request it, and I think that'll be something that'll come more in our school, talking about as our whole school, because that's something that we worked through this year, even district-wide, that, really, all they want in our grade book ideally would be summative assessments, not the
That's all
formative
it is.
assessment. But for me, that's, I don't know, unless I count each little thing and I just say it's summative, but it really isn't for me, it's formative. But yes, they are supposed to be able to retake, but we are wanting to have, they have to show some kind of learning in between. So it can't just
Absolutely.
be like, do
Absolutely.
it, and then I'll give it to you again. It has to be like, do it, you didn't do well, we have to do
There has
some
to be growth.
practice and then, right.
Absolutely.
You know, when I just did one for like tests or something like that, what I've done is I allow them, they have to come in on their own time, and they can correct the errors for half the point for that item. So
Mhm.
they're not, still not gonna get 100 or whatever.
Right, but they can go back and rework
They can
it,
get
yeah.
a half point for if they make the right correction.
Mhm.
It helps, and it calms the parents down too.
Definitely, because they have the opportunity to improve on their work if they want to. Mhm. Any other questions? So, I think for us, it's been a struggle because not all of us were on board with CFAs, but the fact that we're looking at our proficiency skills, I like that those are actually our standards, because, that's just always what we're working for, is them growing their proficiency skills. So we're not pulling out other standards. Now, we do have targets for a unit or for a novel, we'll still have like a learning target, like things specifically we'll want them to gain cultural knowledge or specific, maybe specific focus of vocabulary, specific focus of even a grammar for the upper levels. So we still have those, but overall, we're just grading proficiency. I know that I went to someone that was doing standards-based grading at a different district, and I felt that their standards were grammar topics, which is not what I envisioned or what, you know, it was like, they can conjugate AR verbs, and if they can't do it, then they retake it, and that was a standard. And for me, that just doesn't seem like a standard, that just is, you know, so.
Have you seen the standards that, IWLA put out?
And are
with
they
the
just, are they,
states? They're like under the 3 competencies, which are the 3 modes, and then there's 2 standards
are they
under
the I
each
can
competency.
statements, or is it the?
No, they're like under, interpersonal, please, maybe, I have them somewhere. It's like interpretive reading, interpretive listening.
Okay,
And then there's a written one under, and there's presentational, and then culture's embedded, you don't actually assess culture.
okay.
Has anybody seen those? Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yes,
These
so-
right here.
Yes, right now, actually,
This is what I'm
so,
grading on in the fall, on a 3-2-1 scale, there's no percentages, there's no grade, there's no.
So these are standards that
So-
I,
these, right now, we're asking, you know, our Iowa people to look them over, and so far, we've been getting a ton of positive feedback, but then our executive board's gonna meet in July and kind of just officially adopt them. And I don't foresee any changes because everybody's
They're
going
good.
through and giving positive feedback.
They're good.
And it's all based on ACTFL, it's been vetted by Marty Abbott at ACTFL, and so we're not
so this proposing, like, these would be
the
standards
Iowa
to
World
hit
Language.
in
They're
a
competencies
unit?
and
Competencies.
standards.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so they're,
So they're not necessarily like mandated, they're not mandated, like, we're not a
Recommendations.
core, we're not a core content,
Mhm.
but they're vetted unofficially through the Department of Ed.
So read
With
some, I'm curious to,
support.
Like,
Are they by level
under,
yeah,
let's
and they're on the
do-
IWLA.net website.
Let's do interpretive, like skill 1 is interpretive listening. So recognize a few, and then they do novice low, novice mid, novice high, up to intermediate high. And they give I can statements underneath it. Like I can recognize a few memorized words and phrases when I hear them spoken. I mean,
Which
if
is-
you're writing your own standards, this is it, like you don't need to do it.
which is
Just-
what, which is
You've
probably.
done really good work on it, it's
It's
excellent.
probably similar, but not as specific things, what we don't have, what we're looking at, we're not looking at I can statements, but under listening, we took those actual things and we picked out that we want our kids in Spanish 1 to be at the novice mid-level for listening too. So it has that, but we didn't go into the specifics, that this also adds with the I can statements, possibly, is it
Yeah.
more, it's more fleshed out maybe, or in the actual.
It just makes
It's,
expectations
it's
really
maybe
clear.
more just organized,
Okay.
I mean, we didn't really add
I think
to
it's
it.
easier to understand than just the big ol' booklet.
Right.
Yeah,
It's crystal clear what your expectations are, because it doesn't matter to me whether you call it mastery or proficient, it doesn't matter. What
Yeah.
matters is that the expectations for a student is crystal clear on what they need to be doing.
And now, will you be
At those-
converting, do you have to convert that? Is that just something separate you can do, or do you have to convert that into a grade somehow?
At the end of a grading period, I have to convert it into a letter grade, but I will grade, I'm implementing this fall on a 3-2-1 scale, 3-2-1-0 scale. My 6 standards are the 6 that IWFL, because Sandra Dopp shared it with me in like February, And so I used that, cause we were writing our own and then we got this and I'm like, why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah, exactly.
This is awesome.
Mhm.
And then my grading, in my grade book is just the 6 standards and there'll be a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0.
And are you high school?
Yep.
And does it have to go into a percentage at all for them?
No, there is no percentage at all. It will only get converted to a letter grade at the end of a grading period.
And so
There's
what's your
no
3, 2,
percentage.
and 1?
3 is above proficiency, 2 is proficiency, 1 needs work, and 0 is no evidence.
And so
A 2 proficient equates to a C,
what's a 3 then?
an A.
So is there anything between an A and a C?
Absolutely, because like, say I have a 2 on one standard and a 3 on another and a 1 on another, there's 6
Okay.
of them, so you take your scores, you average them out, it could be 2.7 or 2.5 or 2 point whatever.
So your whole school is on a 3-point
No,
scale like
this
that?
is just me, pilot teacher in my building.
Okay.
And I'm not saying it's the right way, I have no idea. It could be a complete crapshoot and I could fall flat on my face. I'm just saying, I'm gonna try it because it's what's important to me, that kids are doing stuff, that their grading reflects what they can do with
Yes.
the language.
Yes.
And I have administrative support, I hope, to do it, so.
Mhm. That sounds good.
And I didn't mean to I'm not trying to take over, I'm just, you're
No,
doing
no,
a great
this
job.
is exactly,
You're
no, this
doing
is
a great
exactly
job.
what I wanted to,
I'm really not meaning to
talk
take
about,
over, sorry.
grade book and proficiency and stuff like that. I mean, I think that's good. I think always the thing that we run into is converting this into, if you have to. I mean, now Dilworth, we
You
wouldn't
wouldn't
need
have
to
to.
convert it. It could just be like, this is their level, or this is a 3, but it's not, I think the hard part sometimes gets converting it into a grade, if you have to.
And my CBE team, my school's been part of the statewide collaborative for CBE for 3 years, and so we developed the 3-point scale and we developed the conversion. So I'm just going with what the CBE team fought and yelled and screamed about for like 3 days, so.
Well, I would
It's
like
true.
to ask this really quick, because my new principal asked me this, and we'll be standards, so 4, 3, 2, 0, or whatever.
Okay.
And he asked us if we're truly proficiency-based, are you taking the average of all their assessments, or are you going to give them their last assessment?
Yes, and that's one of the things when we're talking about grade books too, because that's how we have our grade book, but there's lots of other ideas out there. And there's one that I've seen, I think it's a Latin teacher, Lance Paddock. Has anyone seen him online, Paddock, or something? He does a rolling grade book, where he's always taking their last assessment, because that should be they should be growing, and that's another way to look at it too.
Depends how much guru you believe in.
Yeah,
Depends
I
if
mean,
you
I
like
under,
Marzano or Gusky, it
Yeah.
depends who you buy into.
I know, and I understand that. I think, again, it's like, if I had the perfect world, that's what I would do, but I have to like, how's that gonna figure in my grade, or how do I keep control of that? But I like that idea too, that kind of a rolling, and it's your
Yeah.
last
You have to
one, should be your best
think,
effort.
What if we could just tank that last test though, or have a bad day?
Give them their budget.
That's the
That's
thing.
And Gusky would say, go back and look,
Go back,
yeah.
and so
Go
we're
look at
really.
But
previous.
that's also where reassessments come
Or
into play.
reassess.
That's
And I
where
do
reassessments
that,
come
I
into
let them, whatever their last one is, but I used to not make them do any work before they would reassess. Now
Okay.
I have a request to retest form that
Yeah.
they have to do and a
Reflection or
checklist
question.
and so it's not just throwing spaghetti on the wall and hoping some of it'll stick.
Yeah.
And at the end, like I asked them, are you ready and why? And tell me like what you've done
What
to
you've done
practice.
to,
And if they're like, I don't know, then I'm like, you're not ready, so come back.
Mhm.
Now, I do have like hard deadlines of like first semester, it's really hard for me to go back and
oh,
change
sure,
first
how can you,
semester.
yeah,
And it's really hard for me to go back at the end of the year, it just has to, it just has to kind of stay. But, I go back and put in the grade, and I give them a week, just because I used to give them more than that, and they would take advantage of it and
Sure.
wait forever.
and then it's harder anyway for them to
Yeah.
revisit the concepts or,
But it's not a hard deadline either. If somebody comes to me and says, I just didn't have time at volleyball and practice and this, and I didn't get it done in a week, I'll give them a couple more days and I'll work with them. But like on the surface, I say you got a week to review
it.
it, yeah.
and I think that's one thing when we're talking about too, because one of our questions is now, okay, so we're trying to performance-based grade or proficiency grade. So what if their reading isn't up there? Like speaking and writing in Spanish 1, I'm like, it's gonna come, I'm not really that concerned, but what do I do with the kid that's still struggling with reading in Spanish? And what do I do to help them? I don't know. I mean, so we thought, one idea we're kind of generating, should we have in the morning, or when we have our help center time, should we have another novel that we're reading with the struggling kids and they're sitting in a smaller group and they're reading just to get more, how do you increase your reading proficiency? I mean, I really don't know. How do you help the kids that are struggling with reading in Spanish?
My mom.
Read more? I don't know.
My mom works in an elementary school and she's a reading interventionist, and that is all they are trained on how to do. And go talk to yours in your district.
Like, what are the steps to help
Yeah,
them?
and they
That's
teach it in
smart.
English, but their goal, they take the bottom of the bottom kids, and my mom does this with tiny kids, I don't know how she does it. God bless her. But she takes the bottom of the bottom kids and she has to bring them to grade proficiency within a year. Or she may end up losing her job. But she takes the bottom of the bottom kids, works 2 to 3 at a time, and all she does is different reading strategies to help them gain that reading comprehension component that. And I talked to her about kids, I had that same problem, I had a kid who has a reading goal in English and in Spanish was not gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I talked to her, and his Spanish reading proficiency increased, and then he ended up testing out of special ed services at the end of this year,
Mhm.
because he was using the strategies we did in Spanish.
Right, and I've heard that too, that it helps with struggling, I mean, the fact that you're targeting, just a few structures of vocab and the
But
repetition
they
can
will
help
have-
students that are struggling.
Each, try this methodology, then try,
Try
they have
that.
a checklist of order that they go in, and that's my genuine, pitch to anybody who teaches a language in a high school room, you are teaching elementary all over again. And so
Yeah.
go talk to the
Mhm.
teachers, hey, you've got struggling readers who don't qualify for special ed services, or parents have been
And what are you
going to
doing
them.
to help
What are
them?
you doing with them, and they'll
Mhm.
tell you, and then it's.
You can apply some of that, that's a great idea. Mhm.
I wonder if the AEAs too, maybe the consultants.
Good luck.
So, great, any other questions or comments? And when is this gonna, the IWLAs, will it be just?
So if you go right now to Facebook,
there.
our Facebook page, it's there at the top. Or if you go to iwla.net, the World Language Competencies, it's one of the drop-down menus.
Do you have the most recent ones?
And yeah, that's the one thing,
We were
make
just
sure,
talking about that.
I'll go
You
look.
got those from Sandra,
The-
they've been
She has been keeping me updated.
Okay.
I will go double check.
yeah,
Thank you.
but and we're still soliciting feedback too, up until our July 9th meeting. And at that time, the goal is, okay, officially approve it, roll it out, maybe do some workshops with it at the conference, which you're all
Yep.
invited to in Coralville,
Would you tell us
October
when
8th and 9th.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
you leave lunch, October 8th and 9th.
7th and 8th.
7th
and 8th.
Coralville.
October 7th
And
and
thank
8th.
you to IOWLA for the hard work on all that. Seriously, it's awesome stuff.
We spent basically the whole year using the can-do statements and
Oh, wow.
doing that, and then we were all done and we were all set.
Yeah.
And then, right at the end of the year, that,
Oh, we've been
that
working
showed up.
on the
And-
concept of this for
It's
4 or
years,
5 years.
yeah.
Right.
Our
Right.
instructional
And to get
coach
it
said, I don't
just
know whether to be excited, yes, we were right on,
Right,
we were right on.
repenting that I
Or
did all that work on your
really
own, or
frustrated that we spent this whole year doing
doing it
this,
on your own,
and
right.
here it is,
Yeah.
somebody else did it too. So,
It's good because it allows you to have tough conversations and so you guys iron stuff out even if.
Even if, yeah.